On this edition of Issues and Insiders, we meet with the creator and performer of the one-man show called Food, currently on stage here in Korea, following much critical acclaim overseas. Welcome to Issues and Insiders for this Friday, April 5th here in Korea. I'm Min Sun-hee. Today, we have a theatrical artist who invites his audience to dinner but leaves much more than food on their plates. For this, I have creator and performer Geoff Sobelle here in the studio with me. Geoff, it's a pleasure.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Right, thank you for being here. Geoff, let's begin then with some details about your show called Food.
Okay. Well, what I should tell you is that Food it's not a play. So that means that there's no characters, there's no story, there's no narrative. It's more like a performance. So what does that really mean? Because that can be sort of confusing, right? It's just, I really am fascinated by the kind of ordinary facets of our life. So things like food, or another show I made was called Home, another show was called The Object Lesson. And I find that these little corners of our life have the potential to tell us so much about ourselves, our culture, our families. So it's really more about the audience than it is, for instance, about me or my story or anything like that. So there's no story, there's just this performance.
Okay, it's a performance. And this particular performance made its Asia debut here in South Korea last night, actually, Thursday, that is, April 4th in Seoul. How did you feel and what was the reception like from your audience?
It was great. It felt really, really good. I was very nervous, of course, making all of our preparations because it's the first time ever doing it for me outside of English language. So I've performed quite a bit this show, but always either in the US or the UK or Australia. So this was the very first time I was doing it not in English. And it went really, really well. I did not speak Korean. I just want to make that really clear. I have an interpreter, translator, Injung, and she's with me throughout the whole show. And everything I say, she's translating in real time. And sometimes what the audience will say back to me.
Right, that is
So she's
amazing.
really on her toes.
Right, I see. Why, Geoff, was Korea chosen as the venue of your Asia premiere?
Well, I should say Korea chose me to some degree. So Sung-mi Kim, who's our presenter at the Gangdong Arts Center, she came and saw us in Edinburgh and invited this show to come to South Korea. But it also would have been my preference anyway. This is my third time to South Korea performing, and every time it's really an amazing audience. It's really, really, really fantastic audience. It's hard to describe the different characters of audiences. It's like Australia versus the UK versus different cities in the US, because each one is so different and each room is so different. But there's just something really special. Like there's something very respectful, and it's very attentive. There's just it's a really wonderful vibe.
All right. We were talking about this right before the start of this show, and I was asking you, Geoff, whether you had to tailor your script or your show to perhaps better suit the Korean audience, because you need to have a interpreter to speak to the audience for you, because you spoke in English.
Correct. And then there's also, there's quite a bit in this show. We had to, not just the words, but also some context. It was interesting performing this show, even for the first time in the UK was the first place we did it outside the US. It was the first time it revealed itself to me how really American the show is. And so there was a lot of little details that, I'm sort of blind to because I'm just so in it, that become very clear when I'm away from home. Oh, that's really American. Right. And so things like that just had to get a little bit changed, little details here and there.
Without affecting the bigger story, of course, I would assume.
Correct. So I'll give you an example. It's a big table. The audience sits at a very large table, like 30 of them. The rest sit around and are watching. And so it's like we're all kind of at the table having dinner. and I'm sort of your waiter. And you have place settings. And I hadn't even really thought about it, but really it's like a fork, a knife, and a spoon because it's sort of Western style. And then we realized like that is not, if you were a Korean audience member and you come and sit, then you realize, oh, I'm sitting at a Western table. You know, so we changed it just like at the last minute because we were like, oh, wait a minute, that's not right. So it was like wooden chopsticks and wooden spoon. So because you should feel like you're at your table. You should feel like you're in your country. This is about you. It's not you're not somewhere else. So like little things like that.
What about the menu? Did you have to change the menu then?
Yeah, all of the menus. Well,
what were you serving last night?
Okay, I have to be clear because if some audience members see this, you won't come to be fed. A few people may eat a few things, but I'm not serving dinner. It is more like a meditation on food. So the setting is the table, but don't come expecting dinner theater. That's not going to happen. However, last night a person did get fried rice.
Fried rice.
That did happen.
I see.
And there were a few other things. Sweet potato.
Right. Geoff, how do you explain perhaps the rave reviews that your show Food has been garnering from critics from the US and over in the UK as well?
Well, that's nice. Thank you for that. I think it's a very warm show, and it's very much about the people that are sitting there watching it. So that's one thing. It really reaches out and it asks you to participate in a sense, to talk even sometimes, and to share, and to really think about your own life, your own relationship to food, and thereby like your culture, your family, yourself, your health, all those kinds of things that food encapsulates. But there's something else too, which is there's something, I love theatrical invention, like analog theatrical invention. So there's a lot of like funny magic tricks or special effects, but that are very surprising, but they are, they're all kind of like done with strings and pulleys and gears and things of that nature. There's nothing, there's no screens, there's no, it feels kind of a little antique or something like that. There's a sensibility that I think you don't get to see that much anymore. So we call it physical theater. That's what I call it. I think that there's an aspect of that that people find quite charming because it's just not something you get to see a lot.
That being said then, Geoff, what is the inspiration behind your theatrical performances?
Well, I learned my trade in Paris at a physical theater school called École Jacques Lecoq. And one of the beautiful things about this school is that Monsieur Lecoq would ask you to go out into the city and find places, like ordinary places, like the hairdresser or a cafe or something. And how could you translate that onto the stage? To find a new theatrical language, just to show us this place. Not a story, not a drama, but just everyday life. How do you activate it? How do you make it interesting? How do you translate it? I love that. So in these later pieces, I've kind of come back, I think, to that idea to, choose these very mundane things like food, or the second one was home. It asks the audience, how do you think about the difference between house and home, those two words? A house is kind of an easy thing to describe, but home, people get quite abstract. And the first one was called the object lesson. So, and it was all about things, just everyday stuff. In all of these pieces, it just cracks me up. It makes me laugh to think about like a very broad topic that you could never really wrap your arms around. And how would we even begin to think about putting something on stage that's just about things? It's like, what? So, and I think that's funny to the audience too, I hope. I think they're kind of curious about it. And then I try to find a scenography or like how will it physically present itself in the space to address this theme? So for instance, in the object lesson, you entered into a room that was filled with cardboard boxes, like you were entering into a crazy storage facility almost.
And these are members of the audience?
Yeah, yeah. There's nowhere to sit. Like you walk in, there's nowhere to sit. There's just boxes everywhere. And you're like, where am I going to sit? And then you realize you can look through the boxes and there's things in them and there are kind of funny jokes. And eventually you realize that, oh, some of the boxes are seats and you sit there. And the performance is kind of happening all around you. And in home, that was more in a proscenium, a typical ordinary proscenium space where you're sitting, you know, in a normal theatrical seat. And but we would produce from an empty stage a two-story house. And then members of the audience begin to live in that house. And it tells you this life cycle of this house. And all of a sudden there's like 40 audience members kind of activated and moving through. And in this one, food, everyone is sitting around this enormous table that I mentioned. So in each of them, there's some particular way that the theme is activated by the real physical presence of the theme itself. Does that make sense?
I'm trying to make sense of it, but let's make this easier then. Essentially then, with regard to food, what message are you seeking to share with your audience? I mean, critics claim it's a call for taking responsibility with regard to our impact on the environment, or it's about the extremes of eating. But I'd like to know what you're essentially seeking to share.
I think those things are there, and especially, you know, they're in there. But really what it's about is people coming together live in a space and sharing an experience. I think that's actually at the heart of it. It's what I'm most interested in and why I think they are popular, these pieces, because it's not asking you to silo yourself or just have your own experience. It's really asking you to consider the people left and right and across the table. And I think we want to do that. I think we just need a little invitation to do that. And so I'm very excited to be invited here to do a piece like that. It's not something that we always get to do. You know, in the US, I'm not exactly sure how it works here, but this is like not commercial theater. It's like an art piece. So you can't really make money doing a piece like this. You can't make money really presenting a piece like this. So I have to say, it's very exciting that like Gangdong Arts Center and like a public arts center like that would invite this piece, and I hope that kind of thing happens a lot more, because it shows that, you know, these works are more about a cultural exchange and artists asking an audience to truly really think about their own lives and what it is to be together in a space. Those things are very special, and I think they're very important, especially right now. So I really have to take my hat off to Sung-mi and the whole organization for doing such a thing.
Right, of course. Geoff, your show Food, it's the third installment in a trilogy. You mentioned the object lesson that was made first, followed by home, and now food.
Yes.
Which, I understand this would be a really tough question. Which one do you like best?
Oh, well.
From the three theatrical performances.
You know, I never set out to make a trilogy. I should just tell you that right off the bat. It just kind of happened that way. And there's things that they all share in common. And I love them all, and for different reasons. But in home, that has a larger group. There's just more actors, there's a big team, and it feels a bit like a family. And actually, I'll tell you that it is my family, because I married, my wife is in the show, and during the making of that show, we had our first child, and so she was pregnant during the show. So there's a lot of like personal things at stake in that one. My sister was the dramaturg on the show, and my childhood friend is the musician in the show. So there's so much about my own home and life that is in that piece, and it's just so fun. But this is so fun in a very different way, but it is just me, so.
In home?
It's still cool. No, in food, it's just me. In home, it's the
whole family.
The whole family.
Right, then going back to food then. What scene is your favorite scene in food?
Well, I So there's little, I don't want to give too many spoilers, but there is a scene where I eat a lot of food.
I actually read about that.
Yeah, I do that.
Do you deliberately perhaps refrain from eating before the start of the show?
Well, yeah, but I would do that anyway. Anyway, but I do that. And I eat a lot of food, and it's technically not easy to do. So it's, that's quite fun. And also I think it's fun to see people kind of change from they're really enjoying themselves, and then all of a sudden I think things turn a little bit.
Right, I'm sure they'll be amused and
darker.
then
Yes.
right, a bit alarmed perhaps if
That's
you're
right.
eating a lot of food. I read about that and I
Yeah.
was wondering whether you...
It gets a little gross.
I see. Right, I'll see the show then hopefully.
Good.
Now, Geoff, critics claim that show, it goes beyond, of course, like sparking taste buds to literally bringing to life every single sense. I'm not sure if that's a hyperbole or an exaggeration, whether it's true, because I've yet to watch your show. What would you say?
That is the intention. Yes. Well, you know something, if you think of our relationship to food, it's not just our taste buds, you know. There's a sense of smell. There's a sense of, you know, you're seeing it. You're hearing things. All of those things come to bear when we're really thinking about food. And essentially, it's also about what it is just to be human and what it is to be alive. So there's a great deal of attention given to, for instance, the sound and the way you experience sound in this particular piece. It doesn't feel like a traditional theater presentation. It feels more akin to something like installation or something a little special. There is some smell. There is some things that activate your sense of touch. So all of those things are meant to just heighten your experience and bring you really into the present moment with one another. That's always the end goal.
Right. A very important factor in your performance then would be the interaction between you yourself and your audience, members of your audience.
Very much.
Having said that, are there other things you have planned perhaps? Because you have shows in Gongju and Gwangju next week, of course, after your show here in Seoul ends. What else do you have in mind perhaps to better engage your Korean audience?
Well, we definitely had to make adjustments to this show for a Korean audience. So some of it is, for instance, about, I'll give you an example. There's a part of the show where I would ask an American audience to think about what they would order at like an American-style diner. That's a very particular, for the Americans who are watching this, they will know and understand. That's a very particular thing because you can get breakfast, lunch, and dinner, all of which are very, very different one from another. And the diner is kind of even for like class structure in the US, it's almost like a great evener. Everybody will, at some point or other, frequent a diner. Everybody loves the diner, but it's like real middle of the road. Some not so middle of the road. So it was like, how does that translate here? Because obviously we're not going to do an American-style diner. It would be meaningless. So we've kind of had to make some adjustments about that. And that has been quite fun to figure out some details to make that work for a Korean audience.
Right, I'm sure. Right, Geoff, I believe we have time for at least one more question then. Let's perhaps end with a few words on your future plans. Are you planning on making another installment or?
Yes, always. I mean, there's always shows in the pipeline. So the next piece will involve music, a big group of people, and there's a lot. It's kind of very much about America, and it's really thinking a lot about on stage and off stage. Like right now we're on stage. You know, there's the part of our life where we really present ourselves to people, but then we might go home or time in the car or time away, and it's really off stage. That's an interesting thing, I think, about us people.
When will that be on stage, do you think?
Well, let's see. We will be doing workshops. They usually have about like a 2-year working process. So
is that how long it takes to come up with a performance?
Well, yeah, because I'll take a long time to make it, and I'll do like a workshop, then nothing, and then a workshop, and then nothing, and then a workshop. And in the meantime, hopefully, touring the last piece to South Korea. So the new one will probably happen a year from this coming summer.
I see. I'll keep my fingers crossed.
Keep your fingers crossed.
All right, Geoff, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much.
Right, well, now for those of you hoping to see Geoff in action, his show Food will be on stage here in Seoul until this weekend before he takes his crockery and cutlery to Gongju and Gwangju next week. Thank you for watching. Have a great weekend.